Hi, my name is Jared and this is Horror Obsession. Today, I want to continue my discussion of the Scream franchise and talk about Scream 2, 1997. I really love the Scream franchise as a whole, and this movie is no exception. This is still peak Wes Craven and Kevin Williamson, and has the core cast all back for more. Scream 2 feels very much like an extension of the first movie, and watching these movies back to back is always a pleasure considering how well they fit together. Scream 2 has a very self-aware, sardonic tone that fits the overall theme perfectly.
Hi! No, I really mean that. Hi. Hi. Do you?
And there are several moments of bizarre tonal shifts, like when Randy is getting murdered and this hip-hop mobile dance troupe walks by, or when Miss Loomis is trying to escape falling styrofoam blocks and is like, oh, I can't jump off the stage, it's so far. Or this moment when the movie is like, okay, we are going to reveal the second killer and it's Gale, just kidding, it's not Gale. Or Derek randomly breaking into a song and dance number to try and win Sydney back, and honestly, I love all of it. The movie takes itself less seriously than the first one, and that's fine with me, because in addition to the silliness, it also has something interesting to say. But before we get into the theme, I wanted to talk about the execution and construction of the film. Scream 2 is paced very well, and just like the first movie, every scene seems to seamlessly lead the audience into the next scene. The characters are also great, and Kevin and Wes do such a good job creating a bunch of convincing and interesting minor characters to surround the main cast with. The sorority girls are hilarious.
Hi! No, I really mean that. Hi. Hi. Do you? I'm sober, sister. I need to be here in case a drunk sister calls and needs a ride.
That's too bad.
Drink with your brain. That's our motto.
Drink with your brain. You're a funny guy, Kevin. They do such a good job, people to this day are still upset they killed Cece, even though she's in like 2 scenes total, one of which is her death scene. The cranky police chief fills his role perfectly. Sydney's roommate Haley is funny and supportive, and we can see why her and Sydney are best friends, though I did find it kind of weird Haley gets to tag along while they drag Sydney to protective custody or whatever. I mean, Sydney is a freshman in college, and she couldn't have been roommates for very long. I mean, Haley is rushing a sorority at the beginning when they go to the party, which usually happens in fall or mid-January. So they've been roommates for between like 1 and 4 months, and they are such good friends. Sydney and Haley are going to go into protective custody together. I bet you didn't realize this was going to be an analysis of the timing of Sorority Rush, did you? I also like Cotton in this. The movie is so aware of the audience expectations of who is going to be the killer, and they take advantage of that. Using a red herring is a very common technique in murder mysteries, and Scream 2 fittingly uses 2 red herrings. In the first movie, the red herring is Billy, and the main subversion is that there's actually 2 killers, including the red herring. Now that we're on to the sequel, this is expected, and so they set up 2 red herrings, Derek the boyfriend, and Cotton the exonerated killer from the first film. Wes and Kevin spend a lot of the movie messing with the audience and setting these 2 up to be the killers, but they point fingers at almost everyone in the cast, especially when Randy and Dewey are having their cute little ice cream date and talking about who the killer might be. One of the more convincing setups for the killer was Gale.
It's happening again, isn't it?
You'd love that, wouldn't you? Who do you think's the killer?
How about Gale Weathers?
Gale? A killer?
Why not?
You see, Gale benefited a lot from the killing in the first movie. She wrote a book, made a bunch of money, and got famous, so it makes sense for her to be recreating it in Scream 2. Media profiting off violence is a major theme. However, before we get into that, I wanted to discuss the other main theme, violence in cinema causing violence in real life. This had become kind of a big deal in the 90s, especially in relation to horror movies. There was a really big British murder case where 2 10-year-old boys killed a kid, and British tabloids blamed Child's Play 3. Because the dad had rented the movie a few months earlier, and the murder had some similarities to a murder in the movie. Turns out the boys weren't home when the dad watched that movie, but there was significant outrage about this at the time. Enter Scream 2. The movie kicks off with Jada Pinkett Smith and Omar Epps going to see a movie called Stab, which is based on the events of the original Scream movie. One of the best parts of the Scream franchise is introduced right away, which is the Stab movies. Wes does a hilarious job parodying himself, and basically films shot-for-shot scenes from the first movie that are almost exactly the same, except intentionally worse.
You know, I don't even know you, and I dislike you already.
So Jada and Omar are watching the Stab movie, and the movie theater is a madhouse of crazy fans celebrating death and violence, and what clearly comes across as a critique of certain horror fans. The way the fans get caught up in the movie and celebrate the violence is directly contrasted with the actual violence happening among them. Scream 2 is about horror sequels, but really it is about the exploitation of violence for money. Sequels are kind of doing this too, and Wes is comparing the fascination with violence in real life to the fascination with horror movies, and also the exploitation of violence in real life for money and the exploitation of original movies for money. The opening scene kicks off the satirical look at horror violence by showing the audience, yeah, you might think it's funny or cool when it happens in the movie, but this shit happens in real life, and you wouldn't cheer then, would you? And sure enough, they don't. Also in this scene, Wes continues his critique of horror fans that think they are way smarter than the horror victims. In the same way Sidney was so condescending in the first movie, Jada is condescending in this one.
See, if that was me, I would be out of there.
Yeah, except people in horror movies don't know they are in horror movies, just like how Jada doesn't know she is in a horror movie either, so she doesn't realize it is her. And instead of getting out of there, she is literally hugging the killer. Moral of the story, you wouldn't know you're in a horror movie until after you've been stabbed, or until after the starting gun, which is where the main characters become aware of the fact killings are taking place. One of the things Scream always does differently than most horror movies is having the inciting incident be the starting gun, so the characters are aware immediately that they are in a horror movie. Despite their knowledge of horror movies and their knowledge they are in a horror movie, they are still powerless to resist their fate. This is touched on later when Sidney is thinking about quitting her play and the drama professor is trying to convince her to stay. Sidney was going to play Cassandra, who is gifted with the ability to see the future. However, she is also cursed so that no one will ever believe her prophecies. She is able to see fate.
So now, fate's vengeful eye is fixed on me.
But is unable to stop it. This directly mirrors what Sidney is experiencing because she knows she is the target and she essentially knows she is in a horror movie, and yet no action she takes will prevent the murders. On a plot level, they do a good job weaving in enough uncertainty that Sidney deciding to stay actually makes sense. In a lot of movies, the main characters are trapped in an isolated location they cannot leave, because it is a lot easier to write it this way. Think The Shining, or I Still Know What You Did Last Summer, where they are trapped on an island during a hurricane. Wes and Kevin take the harder road and try to make it realistic Sidney would stay, which basically is accomplished by having the police chief first say they think it is an isolated murder. By the time they establish they have a copycat killer on their hands, which they do by having Gale piece together the victims' names are similar to those in the first movie, it is kinda late. Sidney and the police detectives try to leave shortly thereafter, but Ghostface shows up to kill the detectives and Sidney is forced to stay for the climax of the movie. She saw her fate and tried to take actions to prevent it, but was unable. Now let's talk about the media coverage of violence as the secondary theme. I touched on this in my review of the first movie, especially Gale at the end reporting on the events of the story immediately after living them, and Scream 2 really runs with this. Remember the hoopla surrounding Child's Play 3 being blamed for kids murdering another kid? Well, this is the overt, intellectual concept that is evaluated by the movie.
Say what happened in that theater is a direct result of the movie itself.
That is so moral majority. You can't blame real-life violence on entertainment.
What? Wait a second. Yes, you can. Don't you even watch the news? Yeah, hello.
Spoiler alert, though this movie's nearly 30 years old, so deal with it, I guess. Alright, so spoiler, Mickey is one of the killers. The best whodunits have a reveal not only of a killer, but also of the motive. Mickey's motive is essentially to commit the murders emulating the ones from the first movie, based on the Stab movies, and then go to trial and blame the movies for the murder.
Get away with it. Mickey is a sick fuck who wants to get caught. Yeah. See, I've got my whole defense planned out. I'm gonna blame the movies.
The message from the first film was that movies don't create psychos, they make psychos more creative, and that is on full display here. Miss Loomis, Billy's mother, even mentions that Mickey was already an active serial killer prior to being recruited to do the killings in this movie. The movies did not cause him to start killing people, but did give him the motive to try and blame the movies, in a staggering display of meta-commentary. Just like the first movie, when the murders start, the cameras come out and there are press conferences and everyone is there to try to make a quick buck. Gale has already cashed in on the violence in Scream 1 and wrote a book about it. Hollywood made the Stab movies to cash in, and they even comment the real-life violence at the theater is an opportunity for them to cash in more.
Kidding me?
It'd be stupid to pull this movie. All this free press, they're gonna have huge numbers this weekend. It'll break box office records.
Everyone is looking to monetize the violence, but few people are actually trying to help the potential victims. To put a finishing touch on this theme, Wes and Kevin have Miss Loomis kill Mickey for having a stupid motive and going back to good old-fashioned revenge.
Mine is just good old-fashioned revenge.
Hey, I just said that. Quiet down, I'm trying to do a video here. Miss Loomis is ostensibly a reporter trying to profit off violence like Gale, but that turns out to be a ruse, and I think this works really well. Miss Loomis has a very believable motive. This is where I would like to point out Gale is the one who is the personification of the exploitation of victims of violence for money. She is hardly the only one doing it, obviously, but she is the character we know best, so she gets to be the figurehead. Dewey is the personification of the other side, those who are trying to avoid the spotlight and just help the potential victims. I think this is why their romance works so perfectly. Once again, David Arquette and Courtney Cox have wonderful chemistry on screen, and in some ways they once again carry this movie. But on a character level, what makes them so compelling is that they are great foils for each other. They accentuate each other's strengths and weaknesses really well. Gale is actually a good reporter and is investigating to try and crack the story, even if her motivation to do so is money and fame. She is the one who figures out the names connect to the first one, and they are doing copycat murders. Also, I have to say, Dewey's introduction where he is lost in the park just kind of looking around is hilarious. I absolutely love it. I also like that they gave him a limp to show some impact of the fact he was stabbed in the first movie, although I kind of hate that he once again survives getting stabbed a bunch of times in this movie. The most optimistic reading of this is some kind of commentary on how sequels avoid having real stakes and just keep bringing the same characters back, something that becomes painfully obvious by Scream 5 and 6. But I think more realistically, Wes realized what he had going with Gale and Dewey and wanted to bring them back for the third movie. The other reason to keep Dewey alive is so that Gale can have her full character arc. She is getting ready to report on the murders the same way the first movie ended, except this time she is more concerned with Dewey and drops what she is doing so she can run to his side. She finally cares about someone else more than fame and fortune, and they kinda need Dewey alive for this to work, so I'm fine with it. Overall, Scream 2 is another excellent entry into the franchise. The best part about this movie is it captures a little bit of the same magic the first one did, and it feels exactly like an extension of the first movie, precisely what a director should be going for when making a sequel to a beloved movie. Scream 2 does a great job staying fun while also taking a look at media's role in perpetuating violence and the opportunistic monetization of violence. The movie is a horror sequel, but is also a satire of horror sequels, while once again working as an actual movie with plot and characters. This balancing act is nearly impossible for a normal director, but Wes delivers expertly, and of course the movie would not be the same without Kevin Williamson's amazing script. I love Scream 2, it might be my second favorite in the franchise, and even if it isn't, it is the perfect sidekick for the first movie, and it's hard to ask for more than that from a second entry in a franchise, even for someone with a horror obsession.